All right, so I want to talk to you about the poem Morning in the Burned House by Margaret Atwood. And what I'd like to focus on uh, really is the title of the poem and a few connections between the title and some of the imagery and figurative language that we see within the poem. I'm not going to focus as much on trying to interpret the poem for you or go through it line by line. So when we have a title, we need to think about that title because it's something that obviously the poet has put some effort into and given us, and so we need to pay attention to that. You know, not all poems have titles. In the Emily Dickinson poems, for example, she didn't title them, and so they're either numbered um, or just the first line is used, and that's a typical convention. But in this case, Atwood tells us the title of the poem is Morning in the Burned House. So let's just start with this first word, morning. So the word morning, of course, is the beginning of the day. It's a word with a lot of positive connotations for us, right? You think of morning, you think of the beginning, you think of something that is new. Symbolically, we think of things like birth or rebirth related to morning. The beginning of a journey. It can often be used symbolically in reference to life. So it is morning and childhood can be associated. So it is in general, right, in the literal sense, it tells us what time of day it is, but it has a lot of symbolic value and it has strong positive connotations for us. So, morning. Interestingly enough, though, there is a bit of a pun here because there is a homonym, mourning, with a U, M-O-U-R-N, right, in terms of sadness or grieving or bereavement. Typically, you mourn for something that is over or past or lost. And so, in some ways, it's a really powerful pun because the morning and mourning are sort of antithetical to one another. We don't think of them as going together or being cooperative homonyms. They really are sort of polar. So something to keep in mind. There is this very literal word morning at the beginning that has strong symbolic references for us and largely positive connotations, but there is a pun that's something that has much more. Mourning is not necessarily negative, but it's usually a response to something that was negative, right? So then we move on to the next word, in. Not a lot to think about here. In, of course, is a preposition. It just tells us where the morning is in this case. And the morning is in the burned house. Now, we know that morning itself can't be contained within a house. So there is a suggestion there, right? So that is that this is a metonymy. It is something related. So we associate morning with a routine. And so what we're talking about here is the particular routine of the morning inside of the burned house. Now, the pun, again, on morning, it could also be the place where this mourning is taking place. So either of those things. The here, of course, is an article. We have to be very careful in reading this to understand that the is a definite article. It is not an indefinite article, and what that means is this is a particular house, right? It is not a burned house. It is the burned house. And that's a simple thing, a simple grammatical matter, but it is important to the poem because it creates a connection between what's happening and the place that it's happening. It's not just some place, it's the place. Burned, of course, suggests fire. It also suggests past tense because it is the past tense. It is not a burning house, something that's happening now. It's something that happened in the past. And so, in that regard, if you think about mourning as something that later in the day you look back on, or if you think of it in a symbolic sense as a period in life, as something that you look back on, or if you think about the pun of mourning and sorrow and grievance and bereavement, that is about something that has happened in the past as well. So there is this sort of chronological anchor point here. So it is a burned house, not a burned house, the burned house. And house here, and of course fire has a lot of symbolic value as well, and we won't know how to interpret the symbolism of something that's burned until we look at the poem and see how we're supposed to interpret it. But fire can be both a destructive thing as well as a source of energy and rebirth. And so if we think of mourning as a time of birth and new growth and new beginnings, and you think of something like the phoenix that's reborn out of the flame, so there could be something hopeful in this, not just something destructive. So both those words, mourning and burned here, if you're looking at all their possibilities, there is a kind of cyclical connectivity involved, right? And a suggestion of chronology. And then the word house, which is interesting because a house is a dwelling place. It is a place where possessions are kept. It is a place where people meet. It is a place where routines occur, but it is not a home. So it is very important here that we don't mistake this as a burned home. And that's important, right? Because sometimes what's not said is as important as what is said, and it's not a home. At least that's not the way that Atwood tells us in the title we're supposed to think about it. Which is interesting because there is certainly a suggestion of family in the poem, and so there's a disconnect there, I think, that we're supposed to see. So real quick then there's a lot going on with the title that informs us how we're supposed to read some of the symbolism and some of the figurative language. So if we go through the rest of the poem, we see again in the first line, it's the burned house, and we have an understanding of routine. What's happening there? I am eating breakfast. Then if we look further, we have melted spoon, we have melted bowl. These are all results of something that has burned. We have the mother, the father, the brother, and the sister, all of whom are gone. That might be unusual for a morning time routine. She shouldn't be alone in the house as a small child, which we learn later she is in this memory. Or if it's not a memory, her as a spirit or something that is anchored to this place. So the fact that the whole family is gone would be unusual for a morning time, perhaps leading us to the meaning of the word mourning, M-O-U-R-N, that she is alone. And so she mourns for the people that are lost. We still have clothes on hangers, dishes by a sink, all of which is beside a wood stove with a sooty kettle and a grate, which is, of course, suggestive of the fire. The fact that all of this stuff is still there in its place is reminiscent of something like Vesuvius, right? And so it suggests us a hasty retreat, as though everyone has left the house very quickly. Yet, for some reason, she's here. And that's sort of ominous, right? She says she can see every detail clear. A rippled mirror, which is an interesting image. It's not entirely certain whether or not that is a mirror that just gives back a poor reflection because it's maybe not a high-quality mirror, or if this is an effect of the heat. We have also, of course, swirls in the oilcloth, flaws in the glass, where flares of the sun come through, right? All of these are results of heat, probably, right? The oilcloth is the tablecloth, and so it seems to maybe have been melted or something like that in place. And so we have lots of hints throughout of extreme heat, an absent family, which is why we have a house, not a home, right? She says that while she can see all those details very clearly, what she can't see is herself. She cannot see her own arms and legs, and she doesn't know if it's a trap or a blessing to be back. That is this, for those of you who are familiar with hauntings and like watching shows about hauntings, is this a residual haunt, right? Has she been somehow imprinted on this location because of the tragedy that happened? Or in maybe a less supernatural way, is this a memory cycle that she's trapped in to sort of relive her past? Or is it a blessing to be able to come back and see this? That is it a good thing or a bad thing? So just like in the title, and we couldn't tell, is this positive or is it negative? She doesn't know either, right? There's some ambiguity to the poem. I'm here, but is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Or is it just a thing? Does it have to be good or bad? Well, she says, I found myself back here where everything in the house has long been over. Kettle and mirror, spoon and bowl, including my own body. So this is sometime long in the past. Again, we think about the meanings of mourning, right? She says, including the body I had then, the physical body, the body I have now, this immaterial body, or maybe she means the body of her youth and the body of her adulthood. Well, I sit at the morning table, and again we get this great opportunity to pun. Is she sitting at this table grieving, or is this simply the table you sit at in the morning? Interesting, she says she's alone and happy. Is she alone? These are not necessarily the same thing, but it's again ambiguous. Is she happy because she's alone, or is this simply circumstantial, that she is both alone and happy, but the two are not necessarily connected? If we read this as she's happy because she's alone, maybe there was some problem with the family. And she's happy to be done with them. Or maybe it's simply that she's alone, but happy to be back visiting this place. A lot of possibilities. Even though she can't see herself, she says, bare child's feet on the scorched floorboards, I can almost see, which means she seems to be able to maybe feel them or something like that. In my burning clothes, the thin green shorts, the grubby yellow t-shirt, holding my cindery, non-existent, radiant flesh. The clothes that she can't see, that should have been burned away, somehow holding together her radiant flesh, incandescent. A lot to unpack there at the end, but those are fire-related imagery, light, right? As Yoda said in Star Wars, right? Luminous beings are we. It's an interesting poem, and I wanted to focus on the title to show you how the title connects to some of the imagery and figurative language and symbolism throughout the poem, so that as you read, you're mindful of that title.